Once upon a time, in a corner of the world that only the birds knew about, there was a magical garden. Here, the fruits were made of solid light, and the leaves were as soft as silk blankets. The ruler of this quiet paradise was known as the Prince of the Fruits, a young man with a crown of woven grapevine and a cloak that changed color with the seasons, moving from the bright green of spring to the deep gold of autumn. He lived in a palace made of hollowed-out pumpkins and giant watermelons. The floors were covered in fragrant rose petals, and the windows were made of translucent lemon slices that filtered the sunlight into a warm, amber glow. Every evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the prince would walk through his garden. He carried a silver watering can filled with liquid moonlight, which he used to feed the ancient trees that grew emerald pears and ruby-red apples, all shimmering in the dark. He moved with a slow and steady grace, ensuring that every leaf was tucked into the cool shadows, and that every heavy branch was supported by a trellis of flowering jasmine. The prince knew that his garden was the source of all the sweet flavors in the world. If he did not keep it peaceful, the fruits would lose their magic, and the leaves would turn to dust. One day, he found a young traveler who had wandered into the garden by mistake. Instead of turning him away, the prince invited him to rest on a bed of giant, soft strawberries that smelled like summer rain and honey. The traveler felt his eyes grow heavy as the prince began to whistle a low, melodic tune that sounded like the wind blowing through a field of ripening wheat. The air became thick with the scent of lavender and crushed mint. The prince explained that in this garden, time did not move in a straight line but circled around the heart of the forest where the mother tree grew. This tree bore the very first fruit of creation, which contained the dreams of everyone who had ever lived. As the moon rose high in the navy sky, the Prince of the Fruits sat beside the sleeping tree. He draped a large, velvet leaf over him to keep him warm, while fireflies began to dance in a slow, rhythmic pattern that matched the beating of the garden's heart. The story drifted into a deep silence where only the sound of growing vines and the gentle breathing of the prince could be heard, ensuring that the garden remained a sanctuary of sweetness and light for all eternity, or at least until the next morning when the first dewdrop touched the ground. The traveler began to sink deeper into the soft strawberry bed as the Prince of the Fruits leaned over a nearby vine. He plucked a single, glowing grape that shimmered like a fallen star. He squeezed a drop of its juice onto the traveler's lips, and suddenly, the young man's dreams were filled with visions of golden orchards and rivers of sweet cider that never ran dry. The magic of the garden was now flowing through his very blood. The prince stood up and walked toward the center of the garden, where the great mother tree stood. Its trunk was made of polished cinnamon wood, and its branches were heavy with every kind of fruit imaginable from every corner of the earth. He began to hum a deeper song, a low vibration that made the giant pumpkins glow with a soft orange light, and the watermelon walls of his palace pulsed like a steady heart. He was calling for the garden to enter its state of deep rest, where the roots would pull in the silver light of the moon, and the leaves would turn their undersides upward to catch the falling starlight. The prince knew that the world outside was full of hunger and noise, but here, within the walls of jasmine and rose, there was only the slow, steady growth of sweetness and the quiet hum of life renewing itself. As he moved, he touched the velvet leaves of the peach trees, and they curled around the ripening fruit like a protective hand, ensuring that not a single bruise would touch the skin before the morning came. He found a small bird that had fallen from its nest and placed it inside a hollowed-out pomegranate filled with soft moss, where the warmth of the fruit would keep the tiny creature safe until the sun rose. The story drifted further into the shadows as the prince himself finally sat down at the base of the mother tree. His grapevine crown rested against the fragrant bark, and he closed his eyes to listen to the silent music of the seeds pushing through the dark soil. He was ensuring that the magic of the garden would continue to grow, even while he slept in the sapphire silence of the midnight hour. In this secret haven, the cycle of sweetness continued, a promise of peace and renewal, whispered on the night air, waiting patiently for the dawn. And so the garden and its prince rested, bathed in moonlight, a timeless dream of perfect tranquility. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more peaceful journeys. Sleep well. The Prince of the Fruits felt the heartbeat of the garden slowing down as the midnight mist began to turn into a thick blanket of silver dew that tasted like sugar and starlight. He reached out his hand to touch a nearby vine and watched as the leaves turned into soft glowing lanterns that illuminated the path for the spirits of the forest who came to drink from the overflow of the liquid moonlight. The traveler in his bed of strawberries began to float slightly above the ground because the magic of the fruit had made his spirit light enough to drift through the indigo air without ever touching the earth. The prince watched over him, ensuring that the wind stayed warm and that the scent of blooming orange blossoms remained constant throughout the long dark hours. He then walked to the edge of the magical garden where the fence was made of intertwined cinnamon sticks and vanilla beans, and he whispered a command to the thorns to grow sharp and high, so that the noise of the outside world could never reach the ears of those who were sleeping in his care. He realized that his life was a cycle of giving and protecting, where every apple he grew was a promise of a better tomorrow, and every leaf he tended was a shield against the cold reality of the stone kingdoms beyond his borders. The prince found a small stream that ran with pure golden honey, and he dipped his fingers into the sweet liquid to draw symbols of peace upon the bark of the mother tree, which acted as a beacon for all the lost dreams that were searching for a place to land. The story drifted into a state of perfect stillness, where the only movement was the slow opening of the night-blooming jasmine and the rhythmic breathing of the garden itself as it inhaled a silence and exhaled a sweetness of 1,000 summers, ensuring that the traveler and the prince would remain safe in their sanctuary of light until the stars faded into the soft pink of a new dawn. The Prince of the Fruits saw the first faint light of a distant star begin to fade, and he knew that the cycle of the night was reaching its most powerful moment when the garden prepares to reveal its greatest secret to those who are truly still. He walked to a corner of the orchard where the trees grew white, chocolate bark and leaves of mint green glass, and he found a small silver bell hidden inside a lily made of sugar, which he rang only once to signal the changing of the dew from silver to gold. The traveler, who was still floating in the air, felt a gentle pull from the mother tree, as if the garden itself were a giant magnet, drawing him toward the center where the dreams of the future were being woven into the skin of the ripening peach. The prince watched as the vanilla bean fence began to glow with a soft, purple radiance that acted as a barrier against the cold winds of the mountains, ensuring that the warm tropical air of the garden stayed perfectly still and sweet. He reached into the honey stream and pulled out a single golden seed which he planted at the feet of the traveler. And as soon as it touched the soil, a vine of jasmine grew in seconds to form a canopy of white stars above the sleeping man. The prince realized that he was not just a keeper of fruit, but a weaver of time, because in his garden a single night could last for 100 years if the heart needed that much rest to heal. He sat back down and let his own spirit drift into the vines of the palace, feeling the pumpkin walls breathe with him in the darkness as he whispered a final blessing to the leaves and the fruits, telling them to hold their sweetness and their light until the world outside was ready to be kind again. The story sank into a deep and heavy silence, where even the fireflies stopped their dance to rest on the velvet petals of the roses, creating a kingdom of absolute peace where the only thing that mattered was the steady, slow, and beautiful growth of a dream in the heart of a garden that would never be forgotten. The Prince of the Fruits watched as the traveler began to descend slowly from the indigo air, his spirit having been filled with enough starlight to sustain him for a lifetime. And as his feet finally touched the soft strawberry bed, the prince knew it was time for the garden to prepare for the great awakening. He walked to the center of the orchard and touched the mother tree one last time, causing the cinnamon bark to ripple like water and release a final burst of fragrance that smelled like rain on sun-warmed earth and crushed nutmeg. The walls of the pumpkin palace began to glow with a soft gold as the lemon slice windows turned from amber to a clear bright yellow, signaling that the long night was finally coming to its end. The prince took his silver watering can and poured the remaining drops of liquid moonlight onto the velvet leaves of the jasmine vines, which instantly began to fold their white stars and prepare for the heat of the coming day. He realized that his task was not just to grow fruit, but to ensure that the memory of the garden stayed with the traveler forever, so that even in the world of stone and noise he would always have a piece of the sanctuary within his soul. The traveler stirred in his sleep, and as his eyes began to flutter open, the Prince of the Fruits dissolved into a shower of sparkling pollen that settled over the garden like a blessing, leaving only the scent of ripening peaches and the sound of the wind whispering through the mint green leaves. The traveler woke up in a field of ordinary grass, but in his hand he found a single golden seed that shimmered with the light of the mother tree, proving that the magical garden was not just a dream but a promise of a sweetness that exists for anyone who knows how to listen to the silence of the earth. The traveler stood in the ordinary field holding the golden seed as the last traces of the sapphire mist vanished into the morning air, and he realized that the Prince of the Fruits was no longer a person to be seen, but a presence to be felt in every sweet breath of the wind. He tucked his seed safely into his pocket and began to walk back toward the world of stone and noise, carrying the silence of the garden in his heart like a shield against the chaos. The magical garden itself sank back into the deep folds of the earth, waiting for the next weary soul to lose their way so that it could rise once more with its pumpkin palaces and cinnamon trees. The story of the prince and his fruit ended not with a closing of a door, but with the planting of a memory that would grow whenever a person stopped to smell a flower or taste a ripening peach, ensuring that the sweetness of the garden would never truly die as long as there were people left to dream of a world made of starlight and silk leaves. The traveler finally reached the edge of his own village, and as he looked back one last time, He saw a single firefly dancing in the daylight, a tiny golden spark that reminded him that the magic was always there, just beneath the surface of the ordinary day, waiting for the night to call it home again. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your night. May you find deep peace and restful sleep. Wishing you the sweetest dreams. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.